Shalom, dear friends. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. We continue with the text that we saw in the previous class. Uh, if you remember, towards the end of the previous class, we tried to see a background study of chapter 12 to see the origin of the two great feasts of the Passover and that of the unleavened bread. So we will now go to the text of chapter 12, as we have seen already the background to the two, let's say, the twin feasts of the Passover and the unleavened bread. I will quickly share the screen. Just before that, a small clarification, because in one of the slides that I presented previously, I comparing the plagues attested in the book of Exodus with the two Psalms. I mentioned that there was no reference to the darkness as ninth plague. Um, I think there was a bit of confusion for some people. Yes, I'll. In fact, in Psalm 105, it is the first plague, according to Psalm 105. Darkness is the first plague, and 78 it is not mentioned at all. In fact, both Psalms 78 and 105 give us just 7 plagues and not 10 plagues. Okay, this is just to clarify a question that was asked to me. Maybe if others also had this, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, we enter into the text of chapter 12. Yes. The feast of Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread. Two accounts are there. We will go verse by verse when possible. As you find in the slide, the ritual of the Passover is from the P writer. In the history of Israel, in the Jewish tradition, there are three great traditions which we are going to see in the coming chapters, chapter 12 and 13. They are the feast of Passover, as all of us know, and that of the unleavened bread. And thirdly, there's a third one, the consecration or the redemption of the firstborn. And these three will be kept alive for generations to come. The three traditions of a Passover, the unleavened bread, and the consecration of the firstborn sons. Sorry. The biblical author presents the accounts as if it is taking place originally at the time of Moses during the Exodus from Egypt. Although we know when we studied about traditions, that priestly writer wrote most of the text after the destruction of Jerusalem, during or after the exile, after they came back from exile. So definitely, we know that the exile took place in 587. They came back in around 538, 39, 37. 39 was the edict of Cyrus, and they came back after that. So this final text of some of these passages from priestly writer came in the, let's say, the 5th century or so, or 6th century. So, but the biblical author presenting as though they took place at the time of Moses. That's why there can be contradictions in the text, and if needed, I will suggest ways to come out of that confusion. Okay, so we will see some of the important details going to chapter 12, 1 to 6, and 8 to 11. So as the biblical text tells us, it's a long chapter, and we will take quite some time today to complete this chapter 12. So it is to be celebrated uh, the beginning of the months, and it shall be the first month of the year for you. Verse 2, chapter 12, verse 2. Which is the first month? It is the month of Abib, to be celebrated in Abib, the first month of the year. Literally, Abib means wheat sheaf. Don't want to worry about the meaning. It is a Canaanite name. The name is in the Canaanite calendar, Abib. The Israelites originally, or rather, let me put it like this. There are two types of calendars mentioned in different parts of the Bible. One is the Canaanite calendar. The names are Canaanite, like Abib, for example. Then, after the Israelites went over to Babylon, or they were taken into captivity, and when they returned, they continued to use the Babylonian names, something that they inherited from Babylon. So after they returned from Babylon, the name for the calendar, the names of the months in the calendar uh, were the Babylonian names. So we also find in the Bible, instead of Abib, the month of Nisan. The later traditions, later writings in the Old Testament refer to the month of Nisan. For example, Esther, chapter 3, verse 7. They are later writings. So do not be confused. So Abib and Nisan are same month. Abib is Canaanite name. Nisan is Babylonian name, which later became, let's say, the Jewish name. They adapted it from Babylon. Okay. Now, each family is to select 1 year old lamb or goat. There is a choice, either a lamb or a goat, but it's 1 year old. And more important, the lamb shall be without blemish. The lamb shall be without blemish. That is a precondition. Now, The text tells us that the lamb should be kept ready on the 10th of the month. The Passover will take place on the 15th of the month. But the lamb has to be ready by the 10th of the month. Why? They cannot be running around to get hold of a 1-year-old lamb without blemish. And it's not possible, or they may not get it when they are supposed to celebrate it. So preparations is already uh, 5 days before the actual date on. Then on the 14th evening, 14th day evening, they kill the lamb, and they shall eat its flesh that night, roasted with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So I am using the text of chapter 12, 1 to 6, because there are also other texts. Right now, I am making use of the text from chapter 12, 1 to 6, okay, and 8 to 11. So the unleavened bread, bitter herbs, roast the lamb or goat is roasted with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The unleavened bread is the ordinary bread eaten by shepherds, and bitter herbs are the desert plants used by the shepherds for spices. So they are making use of the materials available. The shepherds made use of whatever available to them in the desert. Now, in the biblical text tells us they should burn the non-consumable parts before morning. They should eat the meal with the loins girded, sandals on feet, staff in hand, and in haste. If you look at the instruction, the clothing and attire suit the background because they are getting ready for a hurried journey. And these details are valid only for the first Passover. Because later, when they celebrate the Passover, it would take them several hours. And at the time of Jesus, it was a long celebration. A number of psalms are sung. There are different blessings that are integrated into the celebration. So, the particular statement about the sandals on feet, loins girded, staff in hand, and in haste will be part of the very first Passover only. What about the blood rite that is given a lot of prominence? The blood rite. It is to establish the link between the 10th plague and the Passover. The 10th plague is the murder of the firstborn, the shedding of the blood. And that is connected to the Passover festival. Verse 12 will tell us that Yahweh himself will go through the land of Egypt, striking down the firstborn. And for a modern mind, that sounds very strange. Yahweh is going around like a terrorist with a AK-47 pistol. No, I'm just using a symbol for today. Killing, or shooting down, or killing the firstborn of the Egyptians. When he sees the blood on the houses, the destroyer will not be permitted to strike um, yeah, strike all those houses where the blood is sprinkled. At this point, I would like you to uh, get back to what I said in the previous class, towards the end of the previous class, especially the origin of the two festivals. Especially at this moment, it is the Passover. Remember, I told you that this is the original festival of the shepherds, a ritual by the shepherds to ward off evil and to bring fertility for the herd. And in order to keep away all demonic power, they would sprinkle the blood on the tent poles, entrance to the tent poles. Keep that in mind. That when the word destroyer, the ancient shepherds would have considered the demon as the destroyer. But here, the biblical author tells us that the destroyer will not be permitted to strike the houses of the Israelites. Take 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. Uh, sorry. Just please hold on for a minute. Okay, thank. Technical error. I'll get back to you. Okay. Yahweh will pass over. That's the title given. Yahweh himself will pass over the house of the Israelites. Something is sorry. There's a little problem, technical problem with the sharing. 1 second. Just this is yeah. Thank you. Sorry, we come back. So Yahweh himself will pass over the house of Israelites. So here, the word Passover might stand for the terms like to spare, to protect, to deliver. So I'd just like to mention, do a little bit of rereading of the blood rite. The purpose of this blood rite is to tell us to speak about the origin, the why it is done. The smearing of the blood on the tent poles is intended to ward off all danger to the members of the tribe and especially to the young about to be born. So remember, I told you this is originally a feast of the shepherds, a rite of the shepherds. So blood rite is the smearing of the blood on the tent pole is intended to ward off all danger to the members of the tribe. And that's why the danger is personified as the destroyer. For the pre-Israelite, the nomadic tribes, the destroyer would have meant the demonic power. So the blood prevents this destroyer from striking the humans and animals. Of course, humans and animals of the Israelite people. This was seven. So we are now speaking about the feast of the unleavened bread. Okay, for the Passover, we just seen now from verses 15 to 20 about the unleavened bread. This was a 7-day celebration that began on the 15th of the month, which means when it's a 15, the Jewish calculation, the day begins with the sunset of the previous day. That is from the 14th evening to 21st evening, as we find in verse 18, chapter 12, verse 18. Or it's a 7-day celebration. In the first month, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day, you shall eat unleavened bread. So, Passover is a 1-day festival celebrated on the 14th of the month. While the Feast of the Unleavened Bread is a 7-day celebration. And these are the rituals. The rituals are eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day, all leaven must be removed from the house. What is the purpose? They should not keep anything of the previous year to show a new beginning. The Canaanite farmers celebrated this feast of the unleavened bread as the new beginning, as the beginning of the new harvesting season. So those who ate in the ritual, those who ate anything leavened should be removed from the community. They are cut off from the community. They should hold a holy assembly on the first and last day. That's the first day of the celebration and on the seventh day. And they should not do any work on those days. They should cook only those food that all should eat on those days. So these are the rituals that are prescribed for the feast of the unleavened bread from the text that we have from chapter 12, 15 to 20. Okay, let's get back once again to this first part of the chapter. So here we notice that is coming from the writer. Aaron is also given due or very important role. So the chapter begins by saying, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. Why should the author say in the land of the Egypt? The whole thing is taking place in the land of Egypt. So this is an indication that this was written down much later after several centuries, recalling to mind, reminding that these things were told by God to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. The date of the Passover was already fixed for the full moon. As I mentioned yesterday, the shepherds needed the light. They did not have the electricity. So they needed, it was a full moon. And this day was left unchanged. Later, the feast of the unleavened bread was attached to this feast of the Passover. And so, at a later stage, according to chapter 12, it happened at the same time. The feast of the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread. They came together because the unleavened bread was attached to the feast of the Passover. So it lasted for 7 days. Actually, the 7 days of celebration and the eating with all the rituals that we have seen are laid down in Leviticus chapter 23, 5 to 8. So this, according to the scholars, must have taken place after the reformation of Josiah, just before the exile, as we read in Ezekiel chapter 45 and 20, 45, 21. So Josiah, for information, was probably the greatest or one of the greatest religious and social reformer. So he wanted to bring back the spirit of Deuteronomy into the life of Israel. So he initiated a, a reform movement that affected the entire life of Israel for a long time. These rituals with regard to the details of the Passover and unleavened bread prescribed in Leviticus 23 um, reflects the reform by Josiah. What is the connection um, to the history of salvation? All the traditions of the Pentateuch connect the feast of the unleavened bread. I have given the references from Exodus and Deuteronomy, or the Passover, or both the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread with the Exodus from Egypt. So, Exodus, that greatest event in the Bible, in the Old Testament, is linked to either the unleavened bread or the Passover, and often both together, unleavened bread and the Passover. So, the history of salvation recalls to mind the Exodus plus two feasts of the unleavened bread and the Passover. The text which connects them, connects these two feasts, is Exodus chapter 12. And both these feasts are incorporated into the story of Exodus. Now, verse 21 to 28, the instructions for Passover given to us by the J writer. The instructions vary from verses 1 to 20, as we have seen, because the first account is from the priestly writer. Now it is from the J writer, Yahweh's writer. So there are variations. For example, verse 21 does not specify the type of animals. It simply says, Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go, select lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. But we already saw in verse 5, Your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. The priestly writer is very specific, while the J writer is very generic. That's one example. There are several examples. Uh, the J writer's account is too generic. Verse 22 from the J writer adds hyssop as the instrument of applying the blood. This is used as an instrument for applying, for sprinkling the blood, because hyssop has thin branches and it is suitable for use in ritual cleansing. We don't have, I mean, today the priests use sprinklers, generally metallic. So official sprinklers are metallic. You know, you fill the holy water inside and sprinkle. But I have seen in the Western countries, they use the olive branches and dip it in the water, holy water, and sprinkle it. So the early tradition, the Jewish tradition, used hyssop for ritual cleansing. Uh, the importance of the blood rite is highlighted by the J writer. How do they do? Sprinkle it on the doorpost and lintels of houses. Um, the blood of the slain lamb will be sprinkled on the doorpost and the lintels with the help of hyssop. Okay, this is a picture, a photo of hyssop. It is very common even today in Israel. This is a photo of hyssop from our house or theologate in Jerusalem. Okay. So this is hyssop. Now in 24:28, the instructions for the future celebration. The Israelites are asked to preserve the observance of the feast by all future generations. This is very important. Why is the Lord Yahweh giving this important ordinance or statutes? We'll see. This is to explain to the younger generation the meaning of the Passover celebration. I would like you to look at the text on verse 24. You shall observe this rite as a perpetual ordinance for you and your children. I highlight perpetual ordinance for you and your children. This has been so important. And from that first celebration that may have taken place in the 13th century BC up to our own day is because of the importance that the Lord has given to it. It's a perpetual ordinance. When you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as He has promised, you shall keep this observance. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this observance? You reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, and all the details. So, every Jewish parent has to explain to the younger generation the meaning of the Passover celebration. And there is no generation gap. The generation gap should not hinder the memory of the greatest event. This has to be orally transmitted. Today we know how the biblical tradition has made structures to remind the generation, younger generation, existing generation, of the wonderful deed, the greatest event in the Bible. One is the weekly celebration, the festival, Sabbath celebration. Then the greatest feast of the Passover. Then even the so-called feast of the tent, Sukkot, is to remind them of the 40 years of their sojourn in the desert. That will take the people back to the Exodus event. So most of the important festivals, the annual festivals, the weekly celebration of Shabbat or Sabbath, all remind the present generation of what the Lord has done on that Passover night. Okay. Those taking part in the original Exodus and all subsequent Israel communities are linked together in this pivotal experience. So the question at verse 26, the question at 26 is, when your children ask you, what do you mean by this observance? That's the question. What do you mean by this observance? So it is not just a history, it is something more. There is theology, there is interpretation. So it is a contrived question meant to interpret the past in view of the present. So, what is the summary of the answer? The summary is Yahweh spared the Israelites but crushed the Egyptians. I'll read. When he struck, okay, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord. He passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians, but spared our houses. This is the summary which will be repeated. It will be read as a credo of the people, as the creed of the people in the Deuteronomy. We have reference to that also in the Exodus. But the summary is Yahweh spared the Israelites but crushed the Egyptians. So, what happened as uh, an event in the 13th century BC is alive and it affects the present community. So when he struck down the Egyptians, they make their statement of faith. He spared our houses. That is part of the faith experience of the Israelite community. The Egyptians were struck and we were spared. So the purpose of this celebration is to bridge the gap between the old generation and the present generation. The old generation who experienced physically the effect of the Exodus, and the present generation who only heard about it. They are asked to relive those wonderful moments, though the celebration will bring the two generations together. The celebration will bring the two generations together into one original experience. The purpose of this ritual of asking question and answering is pedagogical. Let's put it educational. It has an educational function to instruct the coming present generation. So conclusion to the plague, verse 29 to 32. What God announced in chapter 11, 1 to 8 is carried out, and midnight has a special role. Exactly as Moses had announced in 11:5, takes place in chapter 12. What did he say in 11:5? Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. So, three types: the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn of the female slave who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. So, to those from the royal family and from all Egyptian family, irrespective of their social and financial status, to every firstborn of the livestock. That's what Moses had predicted. Now at midnight, in the darkness, and this is significant, Pharaoh, the godly figure, the self deified Pharaoh, has no control over night. So at midnight in the darkness, which Pharaoh cannot control, Yahweh strikes. The term firstborn appears four times in this text. One in general, secondly, the firstborn of Pharaoh, firstborn of the cattle, and firstborn of everything Egyptian. That's what we find in from 29 to 32. Narrative does not tell us what really happened at night or how it happened. Just a few verses to tell us that this took place. But how and all the details we do not have. Because at night, they're all inside the house, getting ready to start that great journey. So nobody saw anything. Pharaoh, looking at verse 29, there is a phrase from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon and all the firstborn in the livestock. What is that from prisoner? So Pharaoh to prisoner. That phrase represents the two ends of the Egyptian social structure. Pharaoh, the highest royal figure, and the one with the prison, the lowest rung, with the no rights, absolutely, because he is a prisoner. So it represents the two ends of the Egyptian social structure. The death of the firstborn has been a terrible experience for Pharaoh. Please take note of the phrase, he and Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt. For there was not a house without someone dead. Every house had a, um, a tragedy. Every house experienced a tragedy. So please take note of the phrase, great cry from every part of Egypt. Now, it may take you to the desperate cry of Israel. Chapter 2, verse 23 to 24. Chapter 3, verse 7. I emphasized the cry of the people of Israel in chapter 2, 23. The repeated use of cry and groaning. I said it's a cry of the disenfranchised, which God cannot listen. And He has to act. He should act as early as possible. The desperate cry of Israel in chapter 2 and 3 is now transferred to Egypt. We are starting from the house of Pharaoh. This is significant. And as a result, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron at night. At night. Again, why this repetition of the phrase night? Because the deified Pharaoh has control during the day. He does not have control at night. When Pharaoh is least control and most subject to the powers of chaos. So now, no more thinking, no more counsel, no more uh, dilly-dallying, no more hesitancy for Pharaoh to allow the Israelites to leave, even taking the livestock. The previous plagues, Pharaoh was very reluctant, even when he obliged Moses, but he wouldn't allow the livestock. Now, it says here mentions, take the livestock along. I would like you to take note of the four imperatives, four commands that Pharaoh gives. Rise up or arise, go out, NRSV, go away from my people. Go, go worship and serve. See, the NRSV translates as worship, which is not literally correct. The word is serve. Literally, it is serve, not worship. So the four imperatives are arise, go out, go and serve. Why serve? Serving is accepting one as master. Pharaoh is conceding that the Hebrew slaves are no longer in his servitude. The people of God, are going to serve now Yahweh and not Pharaoh. So Pharaoh is cutting the link and the burden of his sovereignty over the Israelites. So Yahweh is now the master and not Pharaoh. Then the coming verse, there are two more imperatives. So we have seen four, now two more. Take and go. Take your flocks and go. There is a seventh one. Finally, the seventh imperative, bless me also. Okay. A biblical author has placed seven imperatives. Arise, go out, go, serve, take, go. And the final one is very interesting. Pharaoh is asking for the blessing. Bless me also. You know, those of you who attended my class Genesis, there was an interesting scene towards the end of Genesis when Jacob came to Egypt, and there was an encounter between Jacob and Pharaoh. And there is an interesting scene um, there in chapter 47, verse 12. There, Jacob blessed Pharaoh And it says, he went out from the presence of Pharaoh. He blessed Pharaoh. So the devastation in Egypt for the Egyptian has been so severe that the Egyptians urged the Israelites to advance the timing of the departure. So it is not just the Pharaoh alone, the entire population. Verse 33. The Egyptians urged the people to hasten their departure from the land. So do not follow the timetable if that was set. Please allow them to quit the place immediately because the devastation has been so terrifying, so terrible for them. So, advance the departure. The haste is seen in the condition of the bread. The people took their dough before it was leavened, and they had no time to prepare a leavened bread, which is their normal food. But they had to be satisfied with the unleavened bread as dough was not leavened. Remember in verse 15, which is coming from the priestly writer, they only stated, priestly writer just stated that they have to eat the bread for 7 days or unleavened bread for 7 days. But J writer tells us why they had to eat the unleavened bread. No time. They have to get ready in haste to depart. Take note just that. Something more very interesting. Israelites collect jewelry made of silver and gold plus clothing from the Egyptians. That's interesting. So they are not just running away with whatever they had. They collect jewelry um, consisting of gold and silver and clothing. Uh, Go back to chapter 3, 21, 22. 3, 21, 22. It was a promise. Promise was made in 21, 22. It states like this: I will bring this people into such favor with the Egyptians that when you go, you will not go empty handed. Each woman shall ask her neighbor, and any woman living in the neighbor's house for jewelry of silver and of gold and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. You shall plunder the Egyptians. And in chapter 11, verse 2 and 3, there is this statement there. Tell the people that every man is to ask his neighbor and every woman is to ask her neighbor for objects of silver and gold. Okay. So the promises made in chapter 3 and chapter 11 are fulfilled in chapter 12 when they collect jewelry and clothing, and they have done something more than that. You know, they plundered the Egyptians. They went beyond requesting. They ransacked, they plundered the Egyptians. Okay, we move to the next stage in verse 37, the final beginning of the final departure. The first destination and the number of people involved in the journey are mentioned in this section, verse 37 to 42. First of all, the places Ramses and Sukkot. Ramses and Sukkot. We have seen Ramses in chapter 1, the two cities of Ramses and Pithom that people were asked to build. But what about Sukkot in chapter 13, 20? we come across Sukkot 20. They set out from Sukkot and camped at the Etham on the edge of the wilderness. See, Ramses and Sukkot were the starting point on the itinerary of Israel. In Numbers 33:5, that is the book of Numbers will give us long list of journeys, preparation for journey, tribe by tribe, and they will have to encounter many of hostile neighbors, where they will also some of them also will bless Israel. So Ramses and Sukkot were the starting point on Israel's itinerary. Sukkot lies 32 miles southeast of Ramses. Okay. Um, and next slide, the picture of the map of see. Mm, Okay. Ramses is to the western side in lower Egypt, and it goes to Sukkot here. Okay. So two cities are dotted here, Ramses and Pithom. In the beginning of Exodus, these were the cities that were constructed by the use of forced labor. So Ramses here, Sukkot, and the journey begins. Okay, we will have when they begin the journey. We will show the map of the journey of Israel. Um, Coming back to the text, the first destination, Ramses and Sukkot. The second is the number of people involved. That you also you will have to take into consideration. It might surprise you. About 600,000 men on foot, not counting the children. 600,000. Here we in India, we use the term lakh, 6 lakhs. Okay, that number is not understood by those outside. Okay, so 600,000 men plus the women and children. So this implies a population of some 3 million people, 30 lakhs of people, 3 million people, men, women, and children. Do you think it is an exaggeration? 3 million people coming out that night. Okay. Neither the land of Goshen nor the Palestinian wilderness would have supported such an enormous number, 3 million. Um, just for information, uh, normal cities of that time had an average of 5,000 to 6,000 people. This might appear really an exaggeration. Okay, maybe sometime later towards the end of the book, we will try to decode that number. Okay, but just here, why the reference to this 600,000 men on foot? So 600,000 men plus their wives, women, and their children. And those years, every family would have at least, let's say, an average of 7 to 8 children. Can calculate. Um, why the reference to the 600,000? Reflects the first census in Numbers chapter 1. Book of Numbers gives us two census taken, one at the beginning and other at the end, towards the middle of it. In chapter 1 of Numbers, actually they are taking the number of the census of people um, at the beginning of book of Numbers, because they are going to start a war. They have to find out how many able-bodied soldiers are available. So in the census, in verse 46, the whole number was 603,550. In this case, they have not counted even the Levites. Levites. It reflects the 600,000 is a reflection of the first census. This is to integrate the detail that is found in the first census in the book of Numbers. Now, how do you explain that? I will try to give a small explanation right now, but the bigger explanation or detail I may give towards the end when it is necessary. Okay, the Hebrew word for thousand is Aleph, originally meant a subsection of a tribe or a clan. Okay, so it can mean two things. Either thousand, it can either mean thousand or a sub clan, a sub clan. Because even it's called homonym, homonym in English. Words spelled and pronounced alike, but meaning is different. You remember when we took Genesis, when we spoke about the rib, creation of a woman from the rib of man. That rib, um, the Akkadian and the Sumerian word can mean both the rib and also life. Same word, two meanings. Same sound, but two meanings. Just like even in English, the word, for example, well, W-E-L-L, when it is used as a noun, we draw water from the well, or we can use it as I hope you are keeping well. Same word, same spelling, same pronunciation, but different meaning. So same way, the word Aleph in Hebrew means on the one hand, thousand. It can also mean people who live in the same tent. People who live in the same tent. So originally, probably that must have been the meaning. The subsection of a tribe or clan. So you take a group of people, um, people who live and put into, and the 12 tribes put together, it would have come around 5,000 or 6,000. Okay, so do not worry about this number. Uh, there is definitely an exaggeration, or even to count. Remember in the beginning of chapter 1 of Exodus, we found that 70 people came down to Egypt. 70 people together with Jacob, chapter 1. Then, in 400 years, 70 cannot be multiplied into 3 million people. Okay, only to say that the 1,000 need not be taken literally. Plus, verse 38, a mixed crowd also, a mixed crowd also went with these people. They joined mixed crowd. What do you mean by this mixed crowd? It tells us that the people who came out of Egypt were not strictly belonging to one kinship or an ethnic community. It was not a pure one ethnic community. There were many people who came out. Now, within the liberation theology and not modern uh, theories would state that it was a great conglomeration of lower classes. So all those who were slaves, those who were oppressed, those disenfranchised, those who did not have the right, they all came out or they joined the original Hebrew population. So this is an indication that the earliest Israel that came out of Egypt was not strictly an ethnic community. There were elements foreign to the Jewish community. So we shall try to place it as a sociological reality. So the Hebrews the term Hebrew in general here used as a sociological grouping of the marginated who had been liberated. So it's more of a sociological reality, okay, and a pure Jewish ethnic reality based on kinship. Then a third issue, verse 40 to 41 tells us that the chronological notice over 430 years, okay, the time that the Israelites had lived in Egypt was 430 years. Why is this 430 years mentioned here? Okay, let's go back to chapter Genesis 15, 13. You know, there it's 400 years promise made to Abraham that his descendants would be in Egypt for 400 years. You know? Now, if you take these chronological data seriously, then we can even find out the time of the pharaohs and the time of the Exodus, the period of the Exodus. It coincided the arrival of the sons of Jacob, the descendants of Jacob in Egypt, coincided with Hyksos invasion in 1220 BC. Um, we can date the uh, Exodus at the time of Ramses II, the great dictator Pharaoh, the nationalist Pharaoh, about 1250 BC. So the Exodus can be dated to, if you take this seriously, to around 1250 BC during the reign of Ramses II. Okay, in verse 42, we have a statement. That was for the Lord a night of the vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So Yahweh himself kept vigil. And that same night is a vigil to be kept for the Lord by all the Israelites throughout their generations. So on the original Passover day, Yahweh kept vigil to protect Israelites and to punish the Egyptians. So too, throughout generation, that night should be kept as vigil by all the people throughout generations. So this verse 42 is a relationship between the very first ancient event of the Passover and the annual ritualistic celebration of the Passover. The author connects these event that took place once and this annual celebration when this was narrated by the biblical author. So towards the end, we conclude this chapter 12 with the supplement given by the priestly tradition that was added that was added to this text because in chapter the beginning of chapter 12 by the same priestly writer we had some reference to alien but it was not too clear, it was not very clear um, uh, about the aliens, about the eating of the Passover meal. You know? But now, in the supplement, the new ordinances are stipulated clearly. So they provide us with the existing rules of the Passover celebration when this was written. And this goes back to the 5th century BC. The priestly writer amended some of these rules. Okay, first, in, no foreigner or sojourner or hired servant or uncircumcised person should eat the Passover. Now, we find later in the biblical text of the Pentateuch, this where um, all the Hebrews who came out were all circumcised. We don't know. No foreigner, sojourner, hired servant, or uncircumcised person should eat the Passover meal. So later tradition stipulated that this celebration of the Passover or partaking of the Passover is reserved only to the Jewish people. No foreigner, no sojourner, no hired servant, no pagan, no uncircumcised person. Secondly, if the uncircumcised person becomes circumcised, then he or she can take part in this Passover meal. Number three, the Passover meal should be eaten inside the house and it should not be taken out. Okay, the Passover meal should be eaten inside the house and should not be taken out. Fourth, no bones of the lamb should be broken. No bones of the lamb should be broken. I would draw your attention to a very important passage from John 19, verse 36. You might wonder why I am taking you to the gospel according to John at this moment. This has something to do with the passage. In verse 36, so we are in the context of the crucifixion of Jesus. You know, the after the crucifixion, um, they the torturers. So after the death of Jesus, they want to make sure that Jesus died. So they got permission from Pilate to have the legs of the crucified people broken. The soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and the other who had been crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they realized that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear. Verse 36. These things occurred so that the scripture might be fulfilled. None of his bones shall be broken. None of his bones shall be broken. Now, um, John, sorry, John uses this text for a very important reason. You know, John will connect the story of the Passover with the death of Jesus. You know? So that's why in chapter 19, verse 36, that is used to as a fulfillment of the scriptures. Um, if John would say that the Lamb, Jesus is the Lamb, is the Passover Lamb. Already in John chapter 1, 29, verse also verse 36 and so on, and First Corinthians chapter 5, find Jesus is given the name of Passover Lamb. And if you take John chapter 18, verse 28, um, John would say that the Jewish people, um, um, sorry, it was Jesus died at the time when the Jewish people were killing the Passover lamb. At the time of the slaughter of the Passover lamb, that Jesus died on the cross. So the New Testament connects uh, connects Jesus with the Passover lamb. So just want to link this to the New Testament. So and then chapter 20, sorry. Chapter 12 concludes with verse 50. All the Israelites did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. That very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, company by company. So this is how the chapter 12, which is a long chapter, and I took a long time to explain this, because this event of the first Passover will be recalled even after 3,000 years and may go on till the end of the world, or as long as the human beings live. So, and every tradition traces it, whether it is of the Passover or of the unleavened bread, takes us back to the event of the first Passover. Okay, I think I will pause for a moment, and if I'll see if there are questions. Maybe you could ask me, because if there are questions, I'll just check. Brother Dixon has just left for some urgent meeting. I'll just quickly go through. I think there are a number of questions. Yeah, someone has asked me, nine plagues are natural. What is the explanation for the killing intent? If you allow me to answer this, maybe towards the end of the Exodus study, I will explain. Not that I have an answer, but I would like to bring it right now, because yeah, I would like to say it right now. Okay, I have some reason. It's not that it's not that I have invented, because even New Jerome Bible Commentary, the most authoritative one-volume commentary that's available today, also has some explanation for this. Okay, did God kill the firstborn? since Pharaoh killed the male Hebrew. So, who Yahweh is, since Pharaoh do not have knowledge of Yahweh. I'm not sure. There is no indication. I think it's not a God who is taking revenge. No, there is no place. Doesn't say that it's because to take revenge for the male children that were killed by Pharaoh. That now God is killing all the male children. No, it is so. As someone else asked me some time ago, if if Pharaoh had agreed to the request by Moses, the first instance, these plagues would not have taken place. So, all these series of plagues are the result of the stubbornness of Pharaoh. And repeatedly, we were told that either Pharaoh hardened his heart or Yahweh hardened the heart of Yahweh. So, first one, it's not God taking revenge. Second, did the Jews get the rituals of Day of Atonement from the Passover? The animal and the sprinkling of blood. Did the Jews get the rituals of Day of Atonement from the Passover, the animal and the sprinkling of blood? No. This will be taken up in the 16th chapter of Leviticus, which is this is in the context of the atonement, you know, the sins that Jewish people commit as individuals and the community. So the blood, the lamb is there, um, the blood is there, but the significance is different significance. In fact, the lamb, the goat, one is a scapegoat, and that carries the burden and it is left to die in the wilderness, and that cannot be sacrificed, or the blood of it is not used, or the meat is not consumed. It is the sign. Because it carries the whole burden, the sins of Israel, both as individual and as a nation. Okay, third, does the death of firstborn and the killing of the lamb on the 14th evening, prefiguring of the crucifixion of Jesus. Um, yes, the New Testament, especially John, is very strong in that connection. That just like the Passover lamb is sacrificed, Jesus, the new Passover lamb, is sacrificed for the sin. But later also will bring the connection between scapegoat of the Day of Atonement and that of Jesus. Next question. I think it is very difficult to imagine that Yahweh can be so cruel to take the life that two of the first child. Yes, our sensitivity today will not allow us to think that. But the context is so different. They are not giving a catechesis on the revenge of God. No, they are making use of certain details to tell us that God sides with the poor people. God sides with the disenfranchised. He sides with the slaves. So God would not have done it. It is she out of necessity. If they had the opportunity to come out, violence was not needed. Okay, so the highlighting, we are not emphasizing the revenge of God. The book of Exodus uh, highlights the liberation of the Jewish slaves from the tyranny of Pharaoh. Okay. A few more questions are there, I think. Yeah. How do the Egyptians Christians view this passage of the 10th plague? Yes, I think once I mentioned that they find it very difficult to accept. When this is being read, don't feel very comfortable. At least a couple of Egyptians who lived in our community during my studies abroad, when that psalm is read, when Israel came out of Egypt and Egyptians as a barbarous nation, that's what the Italian translation indicated. They would feel bad. Okay. Father, who are the other people that departed with the Israelites mentioned in chapter 12, 38? Say, yeah. If you read Numbers, book of Numbers, chapter 11, 4, Numbers 11, 4, you have, okay, I'm sorry. I think I made a mistake in Numbers 11. Or maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Um, there is in book of Numbers. Right now, I'm at random. I'm not able to get the passage. So I said there were half Egyptians and half Jews, etc. So it was a mixed crowd. Okay, vast majority would have been the descendants of people who came down from Israel, Egypt, but there were also other people who joined them. It was more of a sociological reality of people who were oppressed and who were made to work as slaves in Egypt. A few more questions. What are the main differences between the Passover and the unleavened festival? Okay, I mentioned in the other class that at least at its origin, Feast of Passover was the feast of the nomads or shepherds for two purposes. One, to bring fertility for the cattle and the sheep. Secondly, to ward off, keep away from all demonic powers or epidemics. Instead, the feast of the unleavened bread was the feast of the farmers. So they would celebrate the first harvest by making use of the grains of the first harvest and make unleavened bread to show the new beginning. It's a kind of a Thanksgiving celebration, thanking the deity that provided for them the abundance of grain. So one is the feast of Passover was the farmers, sorry, the shepherd's feast, while that of the unleavened bread was of a farmers. So one is nomads, shepherds, other was a Canaanite. So do Muslims celebrate something similar to Passover or festival of unleavened bread? I'm not very sure, but I have seen in maybe 10 years ago when I was in Shillong, I've seen in the traditional, the original Kasi, I think it's called Tengasi. I think I happened to witness a celebration, something very similar to this Passover feast, where the goat is brought and the goat is it is its neck is cut with a one stab and the blood comes out and they roast the goat and share it among the within the clan, and that's also done in the full moon without any help of electricity, the natural light at night it's done. So I think different ancient cultures of something very similar, and the idea is same, to bring fecundity, um, fertility to the flock, and also to ward off evil, I think. Yes. Maybe the last question. I think it's time. If the Passover unleavened bread festival was practiced after the return of exiles from Babylon, does this mean the Israelites never practiced it in the wilderness and the subsequent years until the return from Babylon? No, I'm saying that it is after their return from Babylon that it came as two feasts coming together, and with all the rituals and all the festivities that are there today were practiced, or rather, they were integrated after they came out from Egypt. So there definitely there was something important, something of this, the first Passover. That is why year after year they remembered it. So, with regard to the number of people taking part and all the details, we don't know. But definitely, there was this event of great event of the death in Egypt and the eating of the Passover and the use of the unleavened bread. It was there. That is recalled even after, let's say, 3,000 years. So, but the structure of that, as we celebrate, came after the return of the exiles. Okay, I think we take a weekend break, and I took a long time to explain this chapter 12. I hope it was useful. But we will not be going into such details in the coming chapters. And well, especially, okay, till we come to the real coming out of Egypt and the crossing of the sea and all that. So we will go still in detail. May not be as I did today, but later there are a lot of passages that come from the priestly writer, which we don't have to go into detail. We will casually mention, and then we will complete the book of Exodus as early as possible. So, wish you all God's blessings as we have a Sunday coming up. Maybe for some of, I don't know, some people it's already Sunday. And Shabbat Shalom, take rest, and may God preserve and keep you in His love. Amen, and God bless.